My name is Valerie Thorne, and I am 32 years old. 5 years ago, my sister told my parents I had walked away from medical school. She fabricated a story, and that single, calculated falsehood cost me my entire family. They severed all ties. They blocked my number. They skipped my residency graduation. They were absent on my wedding day. For 5 long years, I was a ghost to the people who raised me. Then last month, my sister was rushed into the trauma bay, bleeding, unresponsive, and slipping away. The emergency team paged the chief of surgery. The double doors swung open, and when my mother saw the name embroidered on the white coat of the doctor advancing toward her daughter's gurney, she gripped my father's arm so fiercely it left deep, dark bruises. Before we dive into the dark reality of what happened next, welcome to their secret stories. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if Valerie's journey truly speaks to you. 1. And write your current location and local time in the comments below. 1. I love knowing where in the world you are listening from. 1. Now let me take you back to the autumn of 2019, to a wooden kitchen table in Wilmington, Delaware, and the very last time my father ever looked at me with a shred of genuine pride. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Thorne household, but only one who seemed to exist. My sister, Cassandra, is 3 years older. She was a natural-born performer, always center stage in school plays, commanding the debate team, the kind of girl who could effortlessly charm any adult at a dinner party and leave them laughing. My parents, Arthur and Evelyn Thorne, salt-of-the-earth, middle-class Delaware natives, absolutely worshipped her for it. Dad managed a local commercial printing press. Mom did freelance tax preparation. They valued 2 things above all else: social standing and absolute obedience. Cassandra delivered both flawlessly, day after day. I was the quiet observer, the one with my nose buried in an advanced biology textbook during Thanksgiving dinner while Cassandra held court at the head of the table. I wasn't a rebel. I wasn't difficult. I was simply invisible. There is a profound difference between being forgotten and never being seen in the first place. Here is a small example. In the 8th grade, I qualified for the state science fair, the only student representing our middle school. That very same weekend, Cassandra had a lead role in a local community theater production. You can easily guess which event my parents chose to attend. When I walked through the door with a second-place ribbon, Dad briefly glanced over his shoulder and said, "That's nice, Val." He didn't ask what my project was about. He never did. I convinced myself it didn't hurt. I told myself I didn't need their validation. Instead, I channeled every ounce of my energy into my academics, my advanced placement classes, and my university applications. I reasoned that if I couldn't be the daughter they noticed, I would become the daughter they could no longer ignore. And for one brief, fleeting moment, I succeeded. The day I received my acceptance letter to Vanderbilt University's School of Medicine, hundreds of miles away in Nashville, something shifted. For the first time in my existence, my father looked at me, really looked at me, and uttered words I had spent 18 years waiting to hear. But I'll get to that. First, you must understand what Cassandra did the moment she realized the family spotlight was shifting away from her. The acceptance letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday in April. I remember it vividly because Cassandra was visiting for the weekend. She was 22 then, working as a junior public relations coordinator at a mid-level agency in Baltimore. It was a decent job, a decent life. Decent, however, was Cassandra's ceiling, though she would never admit it to herself or anyone else. Dad read the official letter at the kitchen table, his eyebrows arched upward. "Vanderbilt School of Medicine," he said slowly, as if processing the weight of the words. "That is an elite institution." Then he looked at me. "Perhaps you'll actually make something of yourself, Valerie." It wasn't a warm compliment, not really, but it was the closest thing to approval I had ever received from him, and I clung to it like a lifeline. Mom called Aunt Clara that very evening. She called her sister, then 2 of our neighbors. "Valerie got into Vanderbilt Medical. Can you believe it?" Her voice carried a pitch I had never heard before. Pride, genuinely felt, undiluted pride directed entirely at me. At dinner, I stole a glance across the table at Cassandra. She was smiling, but it was a cold smile that withered before it reached her eyes. Her gaze was fixed elsewhere, calculating, assessing, recalibrating. I recognized that now. At the time, I foolishly assumed she was just exhausted from her commute. That week, Cassandra began calling me constantly. 2-3 times a week. "How's the packing coming along? Who is your roommate? What is Nashville like?" She inquired about my schedule, my classmates, my professors. She remembered every single name I casually dropped. I allowed myself to believe my sister was finally seeing me. I thought my acceptance into medical school had unlocked a genuine sisterly bond, respect, connection, the things normal siblings share. In reality, I was handing her ammunition. Every minor detail, every name, every insecurity, I offered it all up with a naive, grateful smile. It was during my third year of medical school that everything fractured. My roommate and closest friend was a woman named Chloe Sterling. She had grown up shuffled between group homes, with no family to speak of, and she was the sole reason I survived the grueling first year of classes. Once when I called home during a brutal anatomy exam week and Mom cut me off with, "Can't talk, Val. Cassandra is having a stressful week at the agency." It was Chloe who sat on our linoleum floor, handed me a coffee and said, "Their loss, now stand up. We have cardiovascular pathways to memorize." Chloe was diagnosed with stage 4 gastric cancer in August of our third year. She had no support system, no relatives to lean on, just me. I went straight to the dean's office the following morning and laid out the situation. He approved a formal leave of absence for 1 semester under caregiver status. The paperwork was filed, my spot was held. I was scheduled to return in January. It was entirely documented, fully legitimate. I moved into the spare bedroom of Chloe's apartment, drove her to chemotherapy sessions, and held her hand in the oncology unit at 3 in the morning when the pain became so excruciating she could barely draw a breath. I called Cassandra to let her know. I still don't fully understand why. Perhaps a part of me still believed she was the supportive sister she had pretended to be. I told her about Chloe, the leave of absence, and my plan to resume my studies in the spring. Cassandra's voice was pure honey. "Oh my God, Val, that is devastating. Take all the time you need. I won't breathe a word to Mom and Dad. You know how they worry, they'd just panic." 3 days later, she called our parents. I don't know the exact narrative she spun that night. I wouldn't uncover the full depth of her deception until 5 years later, when it publicly unraveled in a place none of us could have predicted, but the fallout was instantaneous. The call came at 11 at night. I was seated in a stiff plastic chair beside Chloe's hospital bed. She had suffered a severe reaction to her latest treatment, and they had admitted her overnight. My phone illuminated the darkened room. "Dad, your sister told us everything." His voice was flat, ice cold. The withdrawal from school, the secret boyfriend, the downward spiral, all of it. "Dad, that's completely false. Don't." Cassandra showed us the messages, Valerie. She showed us the proof. I pressed my free hand against the cold drywall of the hospital room to keep from falling. "What messages? What proof? Dad, I am sitting in a hospital room right now. I am caretaking my dying friend." A heavy silence lingered over the line. "Cassandra warned us you would say exactly that. She said you would have an elaborate cover story ready." My mother's voice joined the call, trembling with emotion. "How could you deceive us for an entire year, Valerie?" "Mom, please listen to me. I filed a formal leave. I can send you the official paperwork right now. I can give you the dean's direct office number." "Enough," my father cut in. "Do not contact this house again until you are ready to confess the truth. You have brought enough shame upon this family." The line went dead. I sat on that cold hospital floor for 20 minutes. Chloe's IV monitor hummed softly on the other side of the privacy curtain. My phone screen still displayed the call duration, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That is how long it took my parents to completely erase my existence. 20 minutes later, a text message arrived from Cassandra. "I'm so sorry, Val. I had to tell them. I couldn't carry your secret any longer." She wasn't sorry. She had just executed the most precise character assassination of her life, and she signed it with a broken heart emoji. I was hundreds of miles from Delaware. I had $46 left in my checking account, and I had just become nobody's daughter. I tried. I desperately need you to understand that. I exhausted every option available to me from afar, with no financial resources and a dying friend in the adjacent room. Over the next 5 days, I dialed my parents 14 times. The first 3 attempts went straight to voicemail. By the 4th, my father's line was blocked. My mother blocked my number 48 hours later. I sent 2 detailed emails, one brief and urgent, the other comprehensive. The longer message had my official leave of absence paperwork attached as a PDF. I included the dean's direct office number and the name of Chloe's oncologist. I provided every single shred of evidence any rational human being would require to see the truth. Neither email received a reply. I wrote a heartfelt handwritten letter. I sent it via priority mail from Nashville. 5 days later, the envelope returned to my mailbox, marked "Return to Sender unopened." I recognized my mother's neat handwriting on the front. I called Aunt Clara, my father's younger sister, the only relative who had ever treated me with equal kindness. Clara called my father that very evening. She called me back 40 minutes later, her voice heavy with sorrow. "He told me to stay out of it, sweetheart. He said you made your choice and now you have to live with it. Clara had tried to explain the official leave of absence, but my father had simply hung up on her. 5 days, 14 phone calls, 2 emails, a certified letter, and an intermediary. Every single attempt was rejected, blocked, or returned unopened. And that is what solidified the reality. This wasn't a sudden misunderstanding. This was the defining pattern of my entire life, magnified to its most brutal extreme. Every science fair they ignored, every milestone they forgot, every single time Cassandra's version of reality was accepted without hesitation while mine was dismissed, this was simply the final, deafening conclusion. On the 6th day, I stopped dialing, not out of surrender, but because I finally understood that they had made their choice a long time ago. Cassandra had merely handed them a convenient excuse to stop pretending. Chloe passed away on a freezing Sunday morning in December. It was quiet. Just the long, continuous tone of the monitor flatlining and the pale gray winter light filtering through the hospice window. I was the only person present in the room. No one from my family reached out. No one even knew. The only family member I had confided in, Cassandra, was far too occupied cultivating her elaborate lie to care that the reason for my leave of absence had just drawn her last breath. I arranged a modest funeral. 6 people attended. Chloe's former foster sister drove down from Maryland, a couple of medical school classmates, and a dedicated nurse from the oncology ward who had grown close to her. I stood at the altar of a chapel built for 60 and delivered a eulogy to rows of empty wooden pews. I didn't shed a tear, not because I wasn't grieving, but because I had been crying continuously for 3 months, and there was simply nothing left inside me. That evening, I sat alone in our quiet apartment. Her favorite coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Her winter coat still hung by the front door. I opened my laptop and stared at the re-enrollment application for the upcoming spring semester. Then I found it tucked neatly inside Chloe's personal copy of Grey's Anatomy, our ongoing academic joke. She had marked the chapter on the digestive system with a bright yellow sticky note. Her handwriting was shaky but deliberate. Finish what you started, Val. Become the surgeon I know you are, and don't you dare let anyone, especially your own blood, dictate who you are allowed to be. She had written it weeks before she slipped away. She knew she wouldn't be there when I needed that final push. I closed the laptop, opened it again, and submitted the re-enrollment form. 2 distinct paths lay before me, crumble or climb. I chose to climb, not to spite my parents and not for some hollow quest for vengeance. I did it for Chloe and for the version of myself she had so fiercely believed in. I returned to classes in January. I had no familial support, no safety net. I took out additional student loans, accepted a part-time laboratory research position, and survived on hospital cafeteria scraps more times than I care to admit. Medical school does not pause for your personal tragedies. Anatomy practicals do not halt because your family has disowned you. 12-hour clinical shifts do not shorten because you spent the early hours of the morning crying in a sterile supply closet. So I stopped crying and threw myself into the work. I worked as if my very survival depended on it, because in many ways it did. I graduated on schedule. No one from Wilmington was in the audience. I matched into a highly competitive surgical residency at Crestview Trauma Center back on the East Coast, a high-volume, Level 1 trauma center, one of the busiest emergency hubs in Delaware. That was where I met Dr. Jacqueline "Jack" Vance. At 58, Jack was the chief of surgery emeritus, a force of nature built like reinforced steel wrapped in a surgical gown. She became the mentor I so desperately needed and the maternal figure I had lost. In my 3rd year of residency, I crossed paths with Julian Hayes. He was an environmental defense attorney doing public advocacy work at a legal clinic near the hospital. He had calm, perceptive eyes and a dry, understated sense of humor. He was the first person I trusted with the entire story who didn't look at me with pity or try to offer empty fixes. He simply listened. Then he said, "You deserve so much better." 5 words, that was all it took. We married on a crisp Saturday afternoon in Jack's sprawling backyard. 30 guests attended. Julian's father walked me down the aisle. I had mailed a single wedding invitation to the Wilmington address. It returned to me exactly as my letter had years prior, unopened. But Aunt Clara was there. She shed enough tears of joy for 2 parents. Following the ceremony, Jack handed me a sealed linen envelope. "A nomination," she whispered. "Don't open it just yet, you aren't ready." I placed it in my desk drawer and didn't ask questions. 5 years passed. I transformed into someone my family would no longer recognize. Now I need to pause the story for a brief moment. If you have ever been in a position where your own family refused to hear your truth, where facts ceased to matter because someone else's lie was louder, drop a fire emoji in the comments too. And if you believe fate is about to deliver a severe reality check to the people who abandoned me, type karma too. Let's keep moving because what occurred next is something even I could never have anticipated. It is January, present day. I am 32 years old and I am the chief of trauma surgery at Crestview Trauma Center. I own a quiet house in the suburbs with a front porch that catches the morning sun, a husband who brings laughter into my life daily, and a yellow Labrador retriever named Ari who never judges me when I eat cereal at midnight. It is a beautiful, complete life, constructed brick by brick with my own hands. Yet there is a specific, quiet ache that never entirely disappears. It resides in the empty space between your ribs, precisely where a supportive family is supposed to live. I no longer wake up in tears. I don't check my phone in the vain hope of seeing a Delaware area code. But every Thanksgiving, there is a fleeting moment, just a flash, where I lay out the silverware, count the settings, and feel their absence like a physical phantom limb. Aunt Clara still calls me every single Sunday. She remains my only thread back to that former world. I never ask about my parents or Cassandra, but I always listen quietly when she volunteers updates. Mom and Dad are healthy. Cassandra divorced 2 years ago and is now working in pharmaceutical sales. The sheer irony of her career path is not lost on me. Last week, Clara called me with a different undertone in her voice, cautious, hesitant. Valerie, there is something I need to tell you about Cassandra, something deeply concerning. Before she could finish her sentence, my hospital pager began vibrating violently against my hip. Trauma activation. I told Clara I would call her back as soon as I could. I never got the opportunity, because the very crisis Clara was attempting to warn me about was already hurtling down Interstate 95 at 60 miles per hour in a sedan that was about to run a red light. And within the hour, the subject of her warning would be lying on my operating table, bleeding out, with my parents pacing the waiting room floor and my name printed clearly on the intake chart. I just didn't know it yet. Let me back up because what Cassandra had executed wasn't just a single, isolated lie. It had been a continuous, systematic campaign. Clara had been feeding me fragments of the truth over the years, reluctantly, carefully, as if diffusing an explosive one wire at a time. And the reality she described was far worse than anything I had imagined. For 5 years, Cassandra had meticulously maintained her narrative. At every holiday dinner, every family gathering, she performed the role of the grieving, long-suffering older sister. "We don't really speak about Valerie," she would whisper to cousins. "It is simply too painful for Mom and Dad." She would offer a somber head shake, lower her gaze, and let the heavy silence do the heavy lifting. But she didn't stop at mere implication. She fabricated elaborate details. She informed our elderly grandmother that I was living on the streets. She whispered to Uncle Thomas's wife that mutual acquaintances had told her I was cycling in and out of rehabilitation centers. 2 years ago, on Christmas Eve, she tearfully told our mother that she had repeatedly attempted to reach out to me, only for me to reject her. She claimed I was the one who had discarded the family. She inverted the entire dynamic. "I've begged Valerie to come home," Clara recalled her saying during one Thanksgiving dinner, her voice tight with anger. "She won't even pick up my calls. I think she genuinely despises us." Meanwhile, at that exact moment, I was 3 floors beneath the ground in a sterile operating room, fighting to save the life of a teenager. The absolute genius of her strategy, and I use that term with utter revulsion, was that Cassandra didn't need my parents to forget me. She needed them to believe I had active malice toward them. That way their grief felt justified, their silence became a protective shield, and she remained precisely what she had always craved to be, the devoted, loyal daughter who stayed. She wasn't shielding them. She was protecting her monopoly on their affection. And there was one more revelation Clara shared with me, something I didn't discover until much later that painted the entire picture in an even darker light. Julian had shared this with me over morning coffee about 6 months ago. He had been holding on to the information for 2 years. "Something I didn't share with you," he said, placing his coffee mug down with the deliberate care he uses when preparing to deliver difficult legal news. 2 years ago, I received an inquiry from the Human Resources Department at your previous residency hospital. Someone using a pseudonym had contacted them, asking about the employment status of a Dr. Valerie Thorne. They wanted to know if you had ever faced disciplinary action or if your medical credentials were even legitimate. I stared at him, stunned. "Who?" "I had a colleague trace the digital footprint of the inquiry," Julian confirmed quietly. "The IP address traced directly back to a residence in Wilmington." The kitchen fell completely silent. Ari's tail thumped softly against the rug. The coffee maker hissed. She was hunting for something, I whispered. Anything. Anything she could weaponize to keep her narrative alive, Julian agreed. To prove to your parents you were a fraud, she found absolutely nothing, of course. Because there was nothing to find. I wrapped my hands tightly around my warm mug, feeling the heat radiate through the ceramic. She didn't just lie about me once, Julian. She was actively trying to destroy me. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. That isn't simple sibling jealousy, Valerie. That is pathological. He was entirely correct. Cassandra hadn't simply told a falsehood and moved on with her life. She had constructed an entire architecture of deception, complete with load-bearing walls and reinforced beams, and she had spent half a decade ensuring not a single crack appeared in the foundation. Every holiday anecdote, every whispered rumor, every fraudulent inquiry was another brick in her fortress. I could have taken legal action. I could have hired a lawyer, confronted my parents, and demolished her lies. But I chose not to, because life was about to do it for me in the most devastating, public, and ironic manner possible. And it began with a pager vibration at 3 a.m. on a freezing Thursday night in January. At 3:07 a.m., the sharp chirp of the pager pulled me from a deep, dreamless sleep. Julian shifted beside me, murmuring incoherently. Ari lifted his head from the foot of our bed. The screen glowed bright in the darkness. Level 1 trauma. MVC single female 35. Blunt abdominal trauma. Hemodynamically unstable. ETA 8 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes and driving in 6. The streets of Wilmington were black and slick with freezing rain, that particular unforgiving shade of dark that only January brings. As I drove, I mentally rehearsed the clinical parameters of the incoming case, just as I had done thousands of times. Mechanism of injury, anticipated organ damage, surgical intervention pathways, motor vehicle collision, blunt abdominal impact, unstable vital signs, high probability of splenic rupture, potential liver laceration. I had performed this exact operation countless times. I swiped my security badge at the ambulance bay entrance and walked briskly into the trauma center. My surgical team was already moving. 2 residents, a primary trauma nurse, and the anesthesia team on standby. I retrieved the intake tablet from the nursing station and swiped to the incoming patient's chart. Patient Cassandra Thorne, date of birth March 14, 1990. Emergency contact Arthur Thorne, father. My feet froze to the floor. The ambient noise of the emergency department, the rhythmic alarms, the intercom announcements, the squeak of running shoes on clean linoleum all receded like a pulling tide. For 2 seconds, perhaps 3, I was no longer a board-certified trauma surgeon. I was a 26-year-old girl sitting on a cold hospital floor in Nashville, a dead phone in my hand, listening to a dial tone. Dr. Thorne, my charge nurse Linda, appeared at my elbow, her brow furrowed. Are you all right? I looked up, blinked twice, and set the tablet back on the desk. I'm fine. Prepare Trauma Bay 2 and page Dr. Mehta. I want him on immediate standby. The distant wail of an approaching siren grew louder, cutting through the winter air. And trailing behind that ambulance, I knew with absolute certainty, were 2 people I had not faced in 5 years. The ambulance doors burst open, and the paramedics wheeled the gurney in at a run. Cassandra was immobilized on the board, unconscious, her oxygen mask fogging with rapid, shallow breaths. There was deep bruising across her torso, and her left hand hung limply over the metal side rail. The paramedics barked out her vital signs, blood pressure crashing, heart rate spiking, 2 large-bore IV lines running wide open. Running close behind the stretcher were my parents. My mother looked as though she had aged a lifetime. Her hair was thin, her expression hollowed by terror. She wore a fleece bathrobe and mismatched slippers. My father was clad in a flannel shirt and jeans thrown on in a panic, his face the color of wet plaster. That is my daughter, he bellowed past the triage desk. Where are you taking her? I need to speak to the physician in charge. Carla, a veteran triage nurse I had worked alongside for 3 years, extended her hands to halt his advance. Sir, family members must remain in the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is already in place. The chief of trauma is managing this case personally. The chief, Dad grabbed Carla's forearm. Get me the chief right now. Carla glanced through the glass partition of the trauma bay, her eyes landing on me. I was gowned, gloved, with my identification badge pinned clearly to my scrubs. She read the name on my chest, then looked back at my parents, her eyes widening in sudden realization. I gave her a subtle, firm shake of my head. Not now. Carla quickly regained her composure. Sir, the chief is currently preparing the patient for emergency surgery. You will receive an update the moment it is safe. Please, the waiting room is just down this corridor. My parents were gently guided away. My mother was whispering frantic prayers, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone white through the skin. My father kept glancing backward, scanning every window they passed. She is all we have left, he said to the empty hallway, his voice carrying through the quiet department. Please, she is all we have. I heard it clearly through the partition glass, every single syllable. She is all we have. As though I had never drawn a single breath in their world. I stepped into the scrub room alone. I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds. I opened the faucet, letting the hot water rush over my hands, and stared at my reflection in the polished stainless steel mirror above the sink. It was warped, distorted, a perfect reflection of how everything felt in that moment. Scrub cap secured, badge visible. The face of a woman who had been surgically excised from her own family tree was now being called upon to surgically salvage the very woman who had held the scalpel. A part of me wanted to turn around, walk out, hand the pager to Dr. Mehta, and let someone else carry the burden. Let my parents owe their daughter's survival to a complete stranger, rather than to me. It would have been cleaner, simpler, less complicated. But there was a human being on that table with a shattered spleen and a critical liver injury. She was hemorrhaging blood faster than the rapid infuser could replenish it. She would be dead within 40 minutes if the most skilled trauma surgeon in the building did not intervene. And the most skilled surgeon in this building was me. I paged Dr. Mehta directly to the room. I have a profound conflict of interest, I told him as he entered. The patient is an immediate family member. I am disclosing this now and documenting it in the chart. If at any point my clinical judgment wavers, you assume full control of this case. No hesitation. Mehta's gaze was steady behind his mask. Understood, Chief. I instructed Linda to log the verbal disclosure in the nursing record. Everything strictly by the book, everything on paper. Then I pulled on fresh sterile gloves, stepped through the automatic doors of the operating room, and looked down at the table. My sister's face was bruised, her chest rising and falling to the rhythm of the ventilator. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile. There were faint stress lines around her eyes that hadn't existed 5 years ago. For 3 seconds, she wasn't the sibling who had systematically dismantled my life. She was a body on my operating table, and that was exactly how I needed her to be. Let's begin, I said, scalpel. 3 hours and 40 minutes. That was the precise duration required to piece back together what a red light and a steering column had torn apart. A ruptured spleen, we performed a total splenectomy. A grade 3 liver laceration, we repaired it with meticulous, deep parenchymal sutures, layer by painstaking layer. Internal bleeding from 2 distinct mesenteric vessels was systematically clamped, ligated, and controlled. I spoke only when clinical necessity demanded it. Suction, clamp, lap pad, retractor. My hands moved with the automatic precision of years of training. Steady, deliberate, rapid when seconds mattered, and slow when millimeter accuracy was paramount. The surgical residents watched in rapt silence. They always do during my complex cases, but I could feel their focus sharpen as the liver repair grew intricate. I did not hesitate. I couldn't afford to. At 6:48 a.m., I tied the final suture. Cassandra's vital signs were stable. Her blood pressure had normalized. Her urine output was clear. She was alive. Dr. Mehta, who had stood silently at my side throughout the procedure, pulled down his mask. Valerie, he said quietly, that was an extraordinary save. Do you want me to speak to the family? I peeled off my gloves, dropped them into the biohazard bin, and washed my hands in the sink. Automatic, methodical, the exact same routine I had performed 10,000 times. No, I replied, staring at my hands. This one belongs to me. I caught my reflection once more in the scrub room mirror. The same face, the same identification badge, but the internal landscape had shifted entirely. For 5 years, I had been the daughter who vanished. Now, I was the chief surgeon who had just dragged her sister back from the precipice of death. Those two realities were about to collide in a waiting room 40 feet away, in front of my entire morning shift team. I smoothed down my scrubs, checked my badge, took one deep breath, and walked toward the double doors of the waiting room. The hallway had never felt quite so long. The waiting room possessed that quiet, fluorescent stillness that hospitals adopt at 7 in the morning. A few weary families were scattered in the far corners. A television mounted to the wall murmured morning weather reports to an empty room, and in the center row, sitting rigid and sleepless, were my parents. I pushed through the heavy doors, still clad in my blue surgical scrubs, my mask pulled down around my neck, my cap removed. My badge hung prominently at chest level, printed in bold, unmistakable block letters. Dr. Valerie Thorne, MD, FACS, Chief of Trauma Surgery. My father stood up instantly. It was an old reflex, the deep-seated need to command the room. "Doctor, how is she? Is Cassandra?" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes dropped to my chest, reading the badge, then flicked up to my face, then back to the badge. I watched the recognition hit him like a physical blow, a visible tremor that started in his hands and locked his jaw. My mother looked up a fraction of a second later. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. Her right hand shot out, grabbing my father's forearm and clamping down, her fingers digging into his sleeve with a force that would later leave 4 dark bruises. 5 seconds of absolute silence. 5 seconds that stretched to bridge 5 years of absence. I spoke first, calm, clinical, utilizing the exact professional tone I use with every anxious family in this room. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, I am Dr. Thorne, the Chief of Trauma Surgery. Your daughter, Cassandra, sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the collision. The surgery was successful. She is currently stable and recovering in the intensive care unit. You will be permitted to see her in approximately 1 hour." Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, not Mom and Dad. I watched the words land. I watched them cut. Behind me, through the glass window of the nursing station, Linda and 2 other nurses were watching. They knew. By the sheer tension in the room, they had already pieced the puzzle together. My mother moved first. She took a tentative step toward me, her arms rising, a heavy sob escaping her throat. "Valerie, oh my God, Valerie." I took half a step backward, polite, professional, unmistakable. She froze in place. Her hands remained suspended in the sterile air between us for a long moment, before slowly dropping back to her sides. My father's voice emerged, sounding like gravel ground under heel. "You're a physician." "I am." "You are the chief of the department." "I am." "But," Cassandra said, "she told us." He closed his mouth, opened it, and closed it again. I could see the internal gears of his mind grinding, attempting to reconcile 5 years of absolute certainty that was dissolving in real time. My mother was weeping openly now. "We believed you had dropped out. We believed you were. She told us you." "She told you I had dropped out of school," I said, my voice level, devoid of tremor or tears. I had rehearsed this very confrontation 1,000 times in the shower, in the car, in the quiet hours before sleep. I had never imagined it would transpire in surgical scrubs under clinical lights. "She told you I had a partner with a drug addiction, that I was homeless, that I refused to speak with you. None of it was true, not a single word." Through the glass behind me, I saw Carla press a hand to her mouth. Dr. Kimura, a second-year resident, looked down at his clipboard, his jaw tight. Linda set down her pen and stared. My father tried to regain control, his oldest instinct. "This is not the appropriate time or place, Valerie. Your sister is lying in an intensive care unit." "I am aware. I just spent nearly 4 hours of intense labor ensuring she survived. So yes, Dad, I am acutely aware of where she is." He had no response. For the first time in my life, my father, a man who had never lacked a final decree, was utterly speechless. The silence did the work I could never have accomplished with arguments. 5 years of blocked numbers, returned correspondence, and ignored messages had made no impact. But standing here, alive, accomplished, and carrying the proof of my dedication on my chest, that was louder than any letter I could have ever written. My mother reached for the back of an empty chair to steady her shaking knees. "The letters," she whispered. "You said you sent letters." 2 detailed emails with my official Vanderbilt leave of absence documents attached as a PDF. 1 handwritten letter sent via priority mail. You returned it unopened. I recognized your handwriting on the front of the envelope. She pressed her fist tightly against her mouth. My father kept his eyes fixed on the floor. I called 14 times in the span of 5 days, I continued, reciting the facts without anger. I begged Aunt Clara to speak with you. You told her to mind her own business and hung up the phone. I am not accusing you. I am simply stating the facts, and facts do not require volume. Just then, Linda stepped into the waiting area. She didn't know the full history, not yet, but she had urgent hospital business. "Dr. Thorne, I apologize for the interruption, but the board president reviewed the overnight trauma logs. He asked me to pass along congratulations from the Physician of the Year Selection Committee on tonight's surgical outcome." Linda delivered the news as if it were a routine memo. She had no inkling that she had just detonated a second explosive in the room. My mother stared at me, her eyes swollen, her makeup entirely ruined. Physician of the year. It is an internal hospital recognition, I said, turning back to Linda. Thank you, Linda. I need to complete my postoperative checks. I turned back to my parents. Excuse me. I walked toward the intensive care corridor with measured, even steps, my spine perfectly straight. I didn't look back, but my mother's voice trailed after me, small and completely shattered. Arthurs, what have we done? And then I heard something I had never heard in all my 32 years, my father offering no answer at all, because silence was the only honest thing he had left. 4 hours later in ICU room 6, the monitor beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm as the morning light angled through the window blinds. I walked in to conduct the standard postoperative assessment. Vitals, drainage, incision check, entirely routine, except nothing about this encounter was routine. Cassandra's eyes were open, glassy and unfocused from the lingering anesthesia, but open. She blinked at the acoustic ceiling tiles, then at the IV stand, before her gaze drifted sideways and landed on me. She squinted, she read the name on my badge, she read it again. The color drained from her face, in a way I have witnessed only in patients who have just received a terminal prognosis. Valerie, her voice sounded like dry sandpaper. Good morning, Cassandra. I am your attending surgeon. You sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the collision. The surgery went exceptionally well, and you are going to make a complete recovery. You're a doctor. It wasn't a question, it was a realization of ruin. I am the chief of trauma surgery at this institution. I have held the position for 2 years. I watched her face cycle through the exact same emotional spectrum my father had traversed, only slower, filtered through a morphine drip and dawning dread. First confusion, then disbelief, then terror, and finally there it was. The familiar expression I had seen my entire life, the quick, calculating flicker behind her eyes. Even now, lying in a hospital bed with my sutures holding her internal organs together, Cassandra was actively trying to figure out how to spin this situation. Valerie, listen to me, I can explain. You do not owe me an explanation, I said, gesturing toward the glass sliding door where 2 exhausted, tear-stained figures stood in the corridor watching us. You need to explain it to them. I updated her chart, checked the abdominal drain, and walked out without another word. I didn't stay to witness the conversation, but the entire ICU floor heard it. Cassandra's room was not soundproof, and neither was the truth. What do you think Cassandra told my parents when they walked into that ICU room? 3. Option A, she finally confesses to the entire lie. 3. Option B, she doubles down and tries to defend her actions. 3. Option C, she plays the victim yet again. 3. Drop your answer in the comments, and if you haven't subscribed to their secret stories yet, now is the time, because this is where the house of cards completely collapses. 3. I learned the details of what transpired from Linda, who heard it from the primary ICU nurse, who heard it clearly through the glass doors. If you guessed option C, congratulations. You understand my sister's psychology perfectly. The moment my parents stepped into the room, Cassandra began to weep, heavy, dramatic sobs that pulled at her fresh abdominal incisions and caused her heart monitor to spike. Mom, Dad, you have to believe me. I never intended for things to escalate like this. I was just so terrified for her safety. My father stood at the foot of her bed, his voice barely controlled. Cassandra, Valerie is a board-certified trauma surgeon. She is the chief of trauma at this hospital. I had no idea, I swear. She sent letters, Cassandra. She sent detailed emails. She called our home 14 times. She begged Clara to intervene on her behalf. My mother's voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. Is that true? She is exaggerating. You know how dramatic she. Clara tried to tell us the truth, my father cut in, and this time his voice cracked not from sorrow, but from the structural failure of everything he had believed for 5 years. 2 years ago, Clara called us and said Valerie was in residency, that she was a practicing surgeon. You told us Clara was lying to create family drama. Clara didn't understand the full situation. What is the full situation, Cassandra? My mother shrieked, her voice echoing through the intensive care unit. The unit clerk outside flinched. In an adjacent room, a visitor looked up in alarm. And Cassandra, backed into a corner with IV lines in both arms and my sutures holding her together, resorted to her ultimate defense. She pivoted from denial to anger. Fine, she's a doctor, good for her. but she abandoned this family. She never once tried to call us. Because we blocked her number, Cassandra, my father said, his hand gripping the metal bed rail so hard his knuckles turned white. Because you told us we had to. The heart monitor beeped, the IV line dripped, and Cassandra, for perhaps the very first time in her adult life, had no script left to read. Aunt Clara walked into the intensive care unit at 9:45 that morning. I had called her from the scrub room immediately after the surgery, not to use her as a weapon, but because Cassandra was her niece too, and she had a right to know. But Clara arrived prepared. 5 years of forced silence will do that to a woman with a filing system and an exceptional memory. She didn't sit down, she didn't offer hugs. She stood in the center of that sterile room and said, "I have waited 5 years to have this conversation, and I will not wait another minute." She retrieved her phone, unlocked it, and opened a digital folder she had labeled Valerie's Path. Inside were screenshots of every single email I had sent my parents during those first desperate weeks in Nashville. The PDF of my Vanderbilt leave of absence, signed by the dean and stamped with the university seal. My formal re-enrollment confirmation. A photograph of my residency graduation, me in my academic regalia, holding my diploma with Aunt Clara standing proudly beside me, the only family member in the frame. She held the phone out. My mother took it with trembling, weak hands. "And this," Clara said, swiping to a text thread, "is a message Cassandra sent to me 4 years ago." She read the text aloud. "Do not tell Mom and Dad about Valerie's residency. It will only confuse them, and they are finally at peace." The room fell completely silent. Cassandra stared blankly at the ceiling tiles, her jaw tight, but the calculating look had vanished from her eyes. It was replaced by something I had never seen there before, the look of a person who had run out of places to hide. "You told me to keep quiet for the family's sake," Clara said, looking directly at Cassandra. "But this family hasn't had peace. It has lived in a 5-year eclipse." Clara turned to my parents. "And you too allowed this to happen. Not because you didn't love Valerie, but because believing Cassandra's lies was simply easier than admitting you were wrong." No one attempted to argue. There was nothing left to dispute. My mother sank heavily into the bedside chair, but she wasn't looking at Cassandra anymore. She was scrolling through Clara's phone, reading my old emails one by one, her lips moving silently as she processed the words. She stopped on the final email, the one I had sent the night before my residency graduation. I knew the contents by heart. I had read it in my sent folder 100 times. "Mom, I don't know if you will ever read this. I am graduating from my surgical residency tomorrow. I wish you were here. I am still your daughter. I have never stopped being your daughter." My mother doubled over in the chair, letting out a sound that wasn't a sob. It was the raw, guttural sound of a person collapsing under the weight of a monumental mistake that could never be undone. My father stood by the window, his back to the room, his shoulders trembling. Aunt Clara told me later it was the first time she had ever seen her older brother weep in 62 years. Not at their mother's funeral, not when his printing press almost went bankrupt, never. He wept now, silently, facing the wet asphalt of the parking lot while the cardiac monitor beeped rhythmically behind him. Cassandra lay motionless in the bed. She had stopped talking. The IV continued to drip. Her eyes remained fixed on a single point on the ceiling. There was no audience left to captivate. The golden child persona she had worn for 35 years was lying in shattered pieces on the linoleum, and no amount of charm or tears was going to put it back together. "You missed her wedding, Arthur," Clara said quietly, her voice exhausted. "Julian's father was the one who walked her down the aisle. Do you understand the gravity of what you threw away?" My father didn't turn around, but he spoke, his voice cracked and hollow. "What have we done?" It wasn't a question, it was a self-inflicted sentence. But knowing the truth and knowing how to navigate it are two entirely different things. I returned to the ICU that afternoon at the conclusion of my shift, 22 hours after my pager had first awakened me. My parents were still there, of course. Where else would they go? Back to the quiet house where they had spent 5 years pretending they only had one daughter. My mother stood up the instant I crossed the threshold. Her face was swollen, her eyes nearly shut from crying. "Valerie, sweetheart, I am so incredibly sorry, I am so." I raised my hand gently, but with absolute firmness. "I hear you and I believe that you are sorry, but sorry is just a word. It is a starting point, not a destination. What I require right now is time." My father turned away from the window. He looked as though he had aged a decade since sunrise. "We want to make this right, Valerie." "Then you need to understand something," I said, keeping my voice entirely even. This wasn't fueled by anger, it was fueled by absolute clarity, the kind of clarity that only arrives after you have burned through every other emotion, leaving only the cold truth behind. I am not the young girl you discarded. I am not the daughter who begged you to listen for 5 days from Nashville. I have constructed an entire, beautiful life without you, and if you wish to be a part of it now, it will be strictly on my terms. Not Cassandra's, not yours, mine. My father opened his mouth to object, his old habit. Then he stopped, closed it, and offered a small, devastated nod. I looked over at Cassandra in the bed. Her eyes were open, watching me silently. When you are fully recovered, I told her, you and I are going to have a conversation. A real one, but not today. Today, you are my patient, and I do not mix my professional responsibilities with my personal life. I walked out of the room, my posture straight, my stride measured. I didn't look back. I wasn't closing the door forever, but I was the one who now held the key. 2 weeks later, Cassandra was discharged from the hospital. Her surgical incisions were healing well, the emotional ones not so much. I selected the venue for our meeting, a quiet coffee house in Middletown, halfway between her apartment and my home, neutral territory. Julian accompanied me, but he sat at a separate table near the window, ostensibly reviewing legal briefs, though I knew he was keeping a watchful eye on us. Cassandra walked in looking entirely hollowed out. She had lost weight, and the radiant confidence she usually wore was completely absent. For the first time in my memory, my older sister looked fragile. She sat down, wrapping her hands around a paper cup she didn't drink from, and stared at the wooden table. I bypassed any superficial pleasantries. I am not going to raise my voice. I am not going to catalog your lies. You know exactly what you did. What I want to understand is why. A long silence stretched between us, loud enough that the sounds of the espresso machine and the low chatter of other patrons seemed to echo. Because, she whispered, her voice barely audible, you were going to become everything I couldn't be, and I couldn't handle the shadow. I let the confession hang in the air. That is honest. It is the first honest statement you have made to me in 10 years. I am so sorry, Valerie. I believe you are, but your regret doesn't restore the years we lost. It doesn't put our father at my wedding. It doesn't retrieve the box of my childhood belongings Mom shipped back to me as if I were dead to her. She looked away, her eyes filling with genuine tears. I have spent enough time in hospitals to know the difference between real pain and a performance. Then she confessed something I hadn't expected. I also called Vanderbilt twice during your leave. I tried to convince the administration to revoke your leave of absence. I told them you had forged Chloe's medical documents. The ambient chatter of the coffee shop hummed around us. I stared at her, chilled by the depth of her malice. And the Dane refused to listen to me. He protected you. He didn't protect me, Cassandra. He simply recognized the truth. That is not the same thing. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath. This was the boundary I had carefully mapped out the night before, sitting on my living room rug with Ari's head resting in my lap while Julian helped me refine my thoughts. I am choosing not to cut you out of my life permanently, I said, but I am establishing non-negotiable conditions. Cassandra nodded, her expression defeated. Whatever you want. You will tell the absolute truth to every single family member you lied to. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin who spent 5 years believing I was an addict or living on the streets. You will personally correct every narrative you spun. I will. And you will do it in writing, a comprehensive email sent to the entire extended family group. Clara will confirm that everyone receives it. She nodded again. I understand. I met with my parents the following week. Julian drove me to their house, and we sat at the very same kitchen table where my father had read my Vanderbilt acceptance letter, the same table where Cassandra had smiled her cold, calculating smile. I am open to the process of rebuilding our relationship, I told them, but it is contingent on one thing. You must attend family counseling. Both of you, not for my benefit, but for yours. You need to explore why you were so eager to believe a monstrous lie about your own child without ever once picking up the phone to verify it. My father's jaw tightened. We don't share our private business with strangers, Valerie. And that exact mindset is why we are sitting here today, Dad. My mother placed a gentle, pleading hand on his arm. Arthur, please. He looked at her, then at me, and something behind his eyes finally fractured. Fine, he whispered. I stood up to leave, then paused. One more thing. Julian's father walked me down the aisle. That is a reality we cannot alter. But if you wish to be a part of the lives of your future grandchildren, you must earn that privilege through consistency. Apologies have an expiration date, boundaries do not. 1 month later, the Crestview Physician of the Year Gala was held in the Grand Ballroom of the Wilmington Grand Hotel. 200 people filled the room: department heads, hospital administrators, prominent donors, and board members. Crystal glasses clinked, classical music drifted from a string quartet, and name tags gleamed under the chandeliers. I wore a classic black gown. Julian sat at our front table, looking exceptionally handsome in his tuxedo. Jack Vance sat beside him, her arms crossed, wearing that faint, knowing smile she reserves for clinical victories. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone. This year's Physician of the Year is a surgeon whose clinical precision, grace under pressure, and absolute dedication to her patients have set a new benchmark for our hospital. Please welcome our Chief of Trauma, Dr. Valerie Thorne. The room erupted into a standing ovation as I walked up the steps to the stage, the warm spotlight hitting my face. I gripped the sides of the podium and kept my remarks brief. 5 years ago, I came very close to walking away from medicine, not because I couldn't handle the physical demands, but because I lost the people I believed I needed to keep going. What I discovered along the way is that the people who sustain you are not always the ones you are related to by blood. Sometimes they are the ones who actively choose to stand by you. I looked down at Jack, at Julian, and at my dedicated trauma team. And sometimes, I added, glancing toward the very back of the ballroom, to 2 seats Clara had quietly secured, the family you were born to eventually finds their way back. It may be late, but they are here. In the back row, my mother covered her face with her hands. My father stood up, joining the applause. Following the ceremony, my father approached Julian near the coat check. He stood before my husband for a long, quiet moment. "I owe you a profound apology," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have been the man standing beside her. Julian, always gracious, extended his hand. "With all due respect, sir, you should have been many things, but we are here now." They shook hands, my father's eyes red with unshed tears. Cassandra sent the email on a Wednesday evening. Clara confirmed its delivery to all 47 family addresses. I didn't bring myself to read it until the following morning. Julian brought me a fresh cup of coffee and placed the laptop on the kitchen table without saying a word. He always knows when I need space to process. The message was 3 paragraphs long. It contained no excuses, no flowery self-pity, just the stark, unvarnished facts. She confessed to fabricating the story of my withdrawal from medical school, creating false rumors of addiction, and deliberately manipulating our parents to prevent them from learning the truth. She concluded with, "Valerie never abandoned this family. I constructed a narrative to make you believe she did. That burden is entirely mine to bear." The responses from the extended family arrived in waves. Uncle Thomas's wife called Aunt Clara in tears, devastated that she had repeated the rehab rumors at her social club. My cousin Jonathan sent Cassandra a scathing, single-line reply, "I don't even recognize the person you are anymore." Our 92-year-old grandmother, Nana Martha, called me directly. "I am 92 years old, Valerie." Her voice was thin but burning with indignation. "And I have never been so thoroughly deceived by my own flesh and blood. Please forgive an old woman for being so blind." "There is nothing to forgive, Nana," I assured her. "You were lied to, we all were." No one organized a formal campaign against Cassandra. No one sent hostile group messages declaring her dead to the family. But the social currency she had spent 35 years accumulating was entirely gone. You could feel it in the heavy silence that followed her email, in the invitations that quietly ceased to arrive, and in the family functions she was no longer asked to attend. No one actively punished her. They simply stopped believing a word she said. And for someone whose entire identity was built on being believed, that was the most severe consequence of all. My parents began their counseling sessions in February with a therapist in Newark named Dr. Cole, a direct, perceptive woman who refused to let them evade difficult questions. My mother engaged with the process immediately. She had been carrying the guilt of her own passivity like a physical weight, and the first time Dr. Cole defined her behavior as enabling through complicit silence, my mother broke down and wept for 40 minutes. My father struggled. He attended the sessions, sat rigidly in the chair, and answered inquiries with as few words as possible. But Dr. Cole made it clear to him that his obsessive need to always be right and his stubborn refusal to ever re-examine a decision had been the structural foundation of the entire tragedy. Cassandra had designed the lie, but my father's pride had cemented it into place. He didn't argue with the therapist. That in itself was the first real sign of change. 3 weeks into their therapy, my mother sent me a handwritten letter. "I failed you, Valerie," she wrote, "not just when I believed your sister's lies, but every single time I chose temporary peace over basic fairness. Every time I allowed your father's temperament to dictate our reality. Every time I saw you standing quietly in the doorway, waiting to be noticed, and convinced myself you were perfectly fine because it was easier than standing up and fighting for you." I read the letter at my kitchen table while Ari slept soundly at my feet. I didn't cry, but I held the paper for a long time before placing it in the drawer where I keep the things that truly matter: Chloe's note, my returned correspondence, and my wedding invitation. Same drawer, different sides. Healing is not always a dramatic event. Sometimes it is simply a quiet reorganization of what you carry. Cassandra began her own individual therapy as well. I know this because Clara mentioned it, and because Cassandra briefly brought it up during our second coffee meeting. We have met 3 times now. Each encounter is brief, slightly stiff, but marginally more transparent than the last. The first time, she simply stared at her hands in silence. The second time, she told me about her therapy. During the third meeting, she said something that actually carried weight. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Valerie. I don't even know if I deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that I am actively trying to stop being that person." I took a sip of my coffee and set it down. "Then show me. Words have always been cheap in our family. Show me through consistent action over time." She nodded, accepting the boundary without performance. That was entirely new. Do I fully trust her? Honestly, I do not know. I have spent a lifetime watching Cassandra perform, and I am still unable to discern where the performance ends and her true self begins. Perhaps she doesn't know either. Perhaps that is the purpose of her therapy. But I believe in the human capacity for change, and that is all I can offer her right now. She carries my surgical scar on her body, a 7-inch line on her left upper abdomen that will fade from red to silver over the coming year. Every time she dresses, every time she sees her reflection, she will be reminded of the sister she tried to erase. The sister who, when it mattered most, held a scalpel with steady hands and chose her professional oath over her personal resentment. And I carry her betrayal in my memory, a 5-year silence lodged deep within my chest. In the strangest, most painful way possible, we are even. And perhaps with enough time and consistent, unglamorous effort, we will find our way to a relationship that isn't just about balancing a ledger, but about building something entirely new. I am sitting in my office at Crestview Trauma Center. It is late. The corridor outside is quiet, that particular stillness a hospital adopts after visiting hours conclude and before the night shift fully mobilizes. My nameplate is mounted on the door, my diplomas hang on the wall, and on my desk sits a framed photograph from my wedding day: Julian, Jack, Aunt Clara, and our 30 guests bathed in autumn light. There are no parents in that frame. But on the bookshelf beside it, there is a new photograph taken 3 weeks ago. My mother and father are standing on my front porch, their winter coats on, looking slightly out of place. My father's hands are tucked into his pockets. My mother is smiling warmly. It is awkward, imperfect, but entirely real. If you are listening to this story and you recognize elements of your own life within it, whether you are the person who was silenced or the one who did the silencing, I want to tell you something. The truth does not have an expiration date. It does not matter if it takes 5 days or 5 years. The truth has a patient, persistent way of revealing itself precisely when it is needed most. You cannot force it, but you cannot outrun it either. I did not seek revenge against my sister. I didn't need to. I simply focused on becoming a person who had no need for vengeance, and that ultimately proved to be the most powerful response of all. Not a scheme, not a plot, just a life lived fully and authentically on my own terms. And if you are waiting for your family to finally see you, stop waiting. See yourself first. Construct the life you deserve with the people who actively choose to show up for you. And when the others finally turn around to look, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens, how wide, and who is permitted to cross the threshold. That isn't revenge, that is architecture. It is Sunday morning, the first week of February. A gentle snow is falling outside our kitchen window, the kind of light snow that doesn't accumulate but makes the world look quiet and clean. I am preparing breakfast. Julian is grinding fresh coffee beans while humming off-key to the radio, and Ari is stationed expectantly under the table, hoping for crumbs. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands on a dish towel and open the front door. My mother and father are standing on the porch in their heavy winter coats. My father is clutching a bottle of fresh orange juice as if he isn't entirely sure what to do with his hands. My mother is holding a container of homemade shortbread cookies, the ones she used to bake for Cassandra's school events and never for mine. "Hi," my mother says, her voice nervous but hopeful. "Come inside," I reply. "The coffee is almost ready." My father steps into the warmth of the house, looking around the kitchen as if cataloging every detail of the life he almost never knew existed. He clears his throat quietly. Is there anything I can help with, Valerie? I look at him, my father, 62 years old, standing in my home for the very first time, asking for permission to be helpful. You can set the table, Dad. He nods quickly, walks over to the cabinet I indicate, and retrieves the plates. He counts them silently, looking back at me. 4. 4. He lays them out on the table one by one, carefully, as if they might shatter if he isn't gentle. Julian hands him a warm mug of coffee. My mother embraces me by the stove, not a dramatic, theatrical hug, but a quiet, lingering embrace. Her arms wrap around me, her forehead resting against my shoulder. No words are spoken, she just holds on. Ari thumps his tail against the floor. The snow continues to fall outside, and the breakfast sizzles on the stove. It isn't perfect, it isn't the childhood I deserved, and it isn't the seamless reconciliation you see in movies. But it is real, and real is far more than I had for a very long time. My name is Dr. Valerie Thorne. I am 32 years old, and I am finally, slowly, letting myself be someone's daughter again. 4 settings on the table, it is a start. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family boundaries or the relationships you've had to rebuild, please leave a comment below. What would you have done in my position? Would you have opened that door? And if you want more cinematic audio dramas like this, check the description for another story from their secret stories that I think you will love just as much. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.